to Humans of Techlandia. I'm your host, Kate Cockrill. This March, Tao's People and Culture team is taking over the Techlandia pod to explore and experience the human side of rapid tech change. Each week, we're talking with Oregon leaders about what they're seeing and what that means for the rest of us. Today's guest is Teresa Coates. In her role as CEO and co-founder of LearnAir, Teresa works at the intersection of learning, AI, and organizational change, helping teams adapt in real time as technology reshapes how we all get work done. Today, we'll explore what human needs are emerging in the age of AI, how leadership is shifting, and how organizations can respond when change is constant rather than episodic. Teresa, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'd just like to start with your background and what led you to focusing on the intersection of learning, organizations, and artificial intelligence.
Honestly, I didn't start in AI. I started in operations and organizational systems. So I actually don't have a technical background. My work has always lived at the intersection of people and process, however. So for me, how that actually works typically is getting inside of an organization and understanding where it breaks, and then understanding how to insert a technology, a tool, or a human, honestly, to then basically make that work within that operation or that organization scalable. So what I noticed as AI started entering the workplace is that it became really clear that this new technology created a bunch of barrier, and it wasn't necessarily the technology itself, but it was honestly the humans that are having to adapt and start utilizing the technology. So for me, it was one of those moments of I'm seeing how systems, how organizations worked well together, introducing a new technology and watching a true change management moment almost more than anything. So for me, watching the intersection of people and this new technology, it was very, very obvious that people didn't know how to engage with a new technology, that leaders didn't know necessarily how to guide it, and that organizations were trying to layer AI on top of their systems, which really, truly were not designed for that. So honestly, that is what led to LearnAir. We basically take a focus in building AI-ready workforces, so helping organizations go through and adopt the AI tools, but not necessarily just that. We're actually taking a very human approach on going through and preparing people, then actually assessing and preparing the processes, and then also going through, even at a top-down level, having conversations with leadership to actually help shift and change the models that we have worked with in the past into what it looks like for this new technology and how we can start leaning into it. So, yeah.
Really interesting. And I was reading some of the articles that you've written on LinkedIn prior to this interview, trying to get familiar with how you all approach it. And one of the things that you wrote that really stood out to me is you said the future of work is not a contest between humans and machines. Can you share a little bit more about what that means to you?
Honestly, we tend to actually frame the future of work as humans versus machines, but truly that is actually not the model that we're wanting to lean into with LearnAir. The real shift is really geared towards humans working alongside machines, right? And so that is a misconception, or honestly, maybe a misperception that a lot of people are sitting in right now. AI is incredibly powerful at things like speeding up our processes, pattern recognition, processing massive amounts of information. Humans are still essential for the judgment, context, ethics, and honestly, discernment. But even bigger yet are the relationship building pieces of our jobs or of our roles. So organizations that succeed are the ones that are really intentionally designing how those two things work together, both the machine and the human. So really leaning into what it means to have that human intelligence plus artificial intelligence. So what we're doing, just real quick, what we're doing is we're actually really leaning into a simple framework that I think a lot of people will really latch onto, and that's automate, augment, and transform. So we're working really hard to automate what doesn't require human judgment, augmenting roles with AI to increase capability, and then ultimately transforming how work gets done by combining human intelligence with artificial intelligence.
Interesting. So you have this process, and it seems like, from where you're standing, especially from a learning and development standpoint, but also from a systems standpoint, you may be far ahead of where a lot of companies are. I've been noticing personally this shift that's happened lately where we had a lot of people who were hesitant, a lot of companies, especially outside of the tech space, that were very hesitant to involve AI in their work. There was a lot of skepticism, and it seems to be changing. It seems to be more that companies are really accepting this technology, wanting to use it and train it with their people and wanting to do that intelligently. Like, from where you're standing, is that the pivot that you're seeing? What are you noticing in the industry?
I am absolutely aligned with you in that. So we're finally seeing the shift. There's been fear for several years, just so you know. The last couple of years, we've really had this moment of fear, and we're working through those conversations now into this moment of accepting. Right. So people are now accepting, okay, this is here. And what we're watching is a lot of CEOs or leaders of these companies that are now very enthusiastic, and the rest of their people have not yet caught up to that same kind of elastic moment, working through that fear and then all of a sudden just jumping into it full force. Right. So I'm very much aligned. We're seeing that conversation shift. But with that, what I'm really seeing is a new form of leadership that's having to emerge alongside this. So that
Yeah.
is something I'm pretty excited about.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more because I feel like there's a difference between introducing technology and building leaders that can utilize technology well. And I want you to bring us into what that actually looks like in practice.
Yeah. So there's there's an interesting shift when it comes to us recognizing that we're no longer just in a moment of managing humans, but because of the way that this technology is being introduced, we also now have to manage or introduce a new role into our company that is a form of management over our artificial intelligence or our digital employees or teammates as well. And that leadership shift is actually going to create a whole new role of basically managing systems of work, right? So, in AI enabled environment, leaders are no longer just overseeing people. Like, truly, they are overseeing how humans and AI interact together. And that takes a moment of change in a leadership role to now understand what that means. First, leaders need to understand the capabilities and limitations of AI well enough to even guide, right? It like to understand it for themselves, but also then to guide a team into using it, not necessarily just to build it and to govern it. So, second to that, performance management starts to shift, right? So, less about what is being output or the output volume and more about judgment, decision making, and how effectively someone actually leverages AI. Like, how do you measure that KPI in a company right now? That's a new metric that we have to start actually thinking about and deciding as a company in your own policy. What is that new metric that you're working with?
Mhm. Yeah,
And
I'm
I
thinking
mean,
about the framework that you introduced before because and maybe that's the one that you applied at leaders or not, but one thing that it makes me think of is that, you know, in traditional work environments, at least at the management level, you imagine yourself to be managing teams that are doing work that you've actually done yourself using systems and tools that you're familiar with. And I
mhm,
think there's a real change that's happening around that, where somebody that works for you may be using a tool that you've never used before to produce something that wasn't even imaginable previously. And
yeah,
so, you're and getting back to the word discernment, right? Your discernment is so necessary still. Like, is this fitting the goals of our project and what we need? Does it look and feel the way that we need it to look? Is it taking into account all of the criteria that we may have noted in the beginning or not have noted? Talk us through, how do you help leaders and managers work with systems and tools they've never seen through individuals? What do you give attention to?
I mean, honestly, with this environment, it feels like it's constantly in motion, right?
Mhm.
It's so right now, especially with our clients, we're talking about a lot about enabling leaders to actually manage. And what I'm actually noticing more than anything is a couple years back when we hit COVID, right? There was this huge dynamic in how you managed a hybrid team, right? Because you had to bring a lot of people online. And that was a huge shift in work.
Sure.
There was technology hangups. There was things that we all had to adapt to with that. This feels very similar,
Mhm.
uh, but also dissimilar in the fact that this isn't you managing more of a remote team. It's actually managing a team of quite literally, I mean, you can't, I'm not that I anthropomorphize here too much and say that beings, but quite literally automations or agents that you're actually building to take on these roles of other people or roles within a business that had previously been there. And how do you change your mind around that? So some of the things that we're doing right now is actually working truly to we're actually implementing a lot of change management techniques, right? When it comes to how you have to change your mind and your perspective around your role itself. And so those conversations with leadership is actually where it's pivotal. So we're making sure that people are understanding at a leadership level first that when you go through and you start utilizing it and your team starts seeing you utilize it, how much more effective adoption rate the entire company gets simply because there is an adjustment period where people have to see that this is real, that it's actually really truly happening, being implemented within the company. And that's what I'm noticing right now is when your leadership actually really starts biting onto it and leading by example, that's where the most change happens.
And so adoption is a really big piece of this because it could appear to some people, hey, this is just kind of a flash in the pan or things are going to change again so soon. But the idea here is to signal that we're kind of moving in a direction of adoption and probably engaging lots of different systems and processes regularly as we move forward. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, definitely. This one for me is it's interesting watching how it's not just the leadership that's making that shift, right? It's the teams by department. It's the teams, honestly, the fear shows up in a lot of different ways right now. So
Mhm.
there's kind of this power dynamic shift that happens within the company, right? You're starting to see almost a redistribution of power. And not to say that someone doesn't have access to that unless the company actually doesn't roll this out. So if this is a tool that is being used as a tool and only certain teams are getting access, then there is in fact a shift of power within the company itself. And what I want to really lean into is that we want to make sure that as much as possible, we don't treat this as a benefit within a company, right? We don't want to have specific teams have access, is that we want to try to roll the adoption out to the entire company at once for the accessibility, right? It can be anyone from your leadership to an entry level employee that all need to have that same access to the technology to be able to pace at the rate that most companies want to move. So it's really interesting watching that shift happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm following along and I'm thinking if I'm someone who's interested in having a stronger grasp of how my company is going to utilize AI moving forward, how that's going to affect people, uh, what is like a process map that you could kind of share or like what are the steps involved in being able to do that capably again, like giving attention to both the human component and then also the adoption component.
So where we really like to, and this is just our approach, granted, right? There's a lot of different ways people can
Mhm.
approach this. But what we really like to do is we like to go through and think about an adoption from top down, bottom up, right? So training your leadership, making sure your leadership is all speaking the same language and is basically on the same page when it comes to AI. What does that mean? How is it used differently across different teams? Because it's really interesting watching that conversation happen when as a leader you might think of it one way but how it's actually being applied within specific roles or departments it's very different, right? So making sure your leadership has one solid understanding and they're all speaking the same language to then going through and at a department level, right? Each department starts using or understanding AI and finding those use cases that are really effective and then sharing that across the company, really communicating to other teams how you're using it. So almost creating, it could be a middle management, but it could also be honestly just a water cooler conversation about how you're using AI and having those discussions to see how it's impacting how those use cases could be applicable across different departments. Right. So typically we go leadership, then we go departmental, and then we actually start to implement what we call everboarding. And everboarding to us is quite literally ongoing, never ending AI updates within a company. So in the past, when we've rolled out tools, and I think a lot of people that have worked in change management will resonate with this, you typically have a tool and it takes X amount of time to get everybody converted to that tool. When this change with AI is that the interfaces or the UI that you actually interact with is different by department, but it also is something that changes all of the time, right? So like these tools are not static. They're here, they're constantly dynamic and changing. And so the way that you might have a portion of your job automated has to change simply because the tool that you decided to implement throughout your company, let's just say ChatGPT, if your company leans into it, it's going to be interesting when a new update is rolled out that we don't have any warning of, and the way that you had set up your automations or your workflow, your digital employee even, like fundamentally changes. So
Mm.
we came up with this everboarding essentially program, which is just constantly updating teams that we've worked with in the past on how AI changes. But that concept should be something that honestly any corporation or organization starts to adopt as well, is keeping their people updated as much as they can. And that's kind of a big ask if you don't have a team designated to do that, but it's
Right.
definitely important.
Yeah, it seems like an emerging role within companies to be paying attention to the evolution and to avoid, I guess, maybe like AI FOMO too, right? There's
Oh,
so many
absolutely.
products that are competing with each other
Yeah.
that you could be selecting and choosing. But in the larger your organization, the more complex that might be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, going through right now, one of the best things you could possibly do for efficiency within your company is going through and reducing your tooling, right? Taking that assessment and, create a keep kill list. What do you actually use? What portion of that tool does your team actually use? How do you shift it or create your own tool and design it so now it's actually more effective? And what's so funny is in the age of AI, how absolutely attainable it is for a company now to say, you know what, I have a really unique use case. This tool has cost us a lot of money per licenses for a company. I can actually go and create my own tool now that's really more catered towards my company and how we use it. Knowing that there's so much access to being able to create these own things that actually increase the value of your company simply because you created your own internal tool, it's it's amazing, but again, if you don't have the enablement or you are not empowered by your leadership to go through and make those decisions and do that, it's pretty detrimental.
Mhm. I mean, in certain circumstances, your tool could even create a tool. Uh,
Yes, absolutely.
so
That's absolutely true.
so let's talk about that. Like, one of the roles it occurs to me as you're talking about that is sort of like leaders as guides or managers as guides of how are we going to explore the best tools for our systems, our services, how we do work. How do you educate people on how to become good, guides? I'm thinking coaches, I'm thinking curators of
Yeah.
these systems and processes.
I mean, to be entirely honest with you, that's a role that has to shift over time, right? So we have these humans that have worked in these roles for a long period of time, talking subject matter experts
Mhm.
that really understand the roles that they have played in the past innately. Those leaders can turn into essentially QA specialists, right? So, to be entirely honest with you, most of our jobs, most of what I go to work to do is 80% administrative work, right? There's a lot of things that are just time suckers more than anything. And those roles, as you start to assess and you understand innately what your process is, there's so much power in understanding your process, just so you know. If you understand what your process is, you start looking for opportunity to automate. That then turns that role into a role that you can then augment using AI. And when I say that, I mean quite literally handing off, 60, 70% of the administrative tasks. And then you, as the human, use your discernment, your skill that you've learned over time, watching how it impacts the business to actually do the human part and go in and say, yep, that is done correctly now. Over time, we will be doing a lot more QAing over AI that's going to be doing the roles or the actual job, the work itself that we used to do, and stepping in and changing that mindset around what our role is. Now, that being said, that's kind of a hard ask because not all of us have been trained with management or leadership skills,
Mhm.
right? So, the more that we can upskill our own internal team as to how to start managing, now, granted, that's going to be different with AI. You have to think about what that manager looks like. But the more that we can upskill what the management and the leadership kind of skills, that's going to be something that will be extremely, extremely valuable in the long run for a company.
Mhm. And what I actually noticed this also in one of your articles on LinkedIn is how soft skills are becoming really important in this relationship with AI. What are some of the skills that you see that may be emerging as more important than we initially thought, or more part of the human side of this world of interacting with machines?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's a great question because I actually can tell you in the past, there's a lot of times I was hiring for your resume, essentially. I was looking at what you had done in the past, and realistically, now it's more so that that person that used to hire off gut feel, that used to say, "Yep, I think that you would be really good in that client experience or that client relationship position because you're a relational person." Those soft skills, the ones that we have really truly disregarded in the past, will be almost invaluable. The ability to have a human relationship, the ability to look someone in the eyes, to converse in a way that actually makes sense, to articulate, to be able to go through and discern. And you're going to hear me say that. I mean, I've already said that probably 10 times throughout this today, but discernment is so extremely valuable to say, yes, that is correct. No, that will have this kind of implication. Those skills that have been somewhat disregarded, even empathy, right? Like the ability to go through and relate with someone, that human part of our role is going to be truly what's most valuable in the future for human roles that we're hiring for. Because there are so many humans today that are being hired to go through and enter data in spreadsheets. That's still happening today. And I mean, honestly, that is now an AI job. And that's not to disregard someone's expertise in doing that over the years. That's to say, what can you do with you as a human, with your one and only human experience that you get? How can you apply the skills that you do have outside of entering data into a spreadsheet into a different area of expertise? How can you mold that into something else special for yourself? And so I do honestly think that in the future, as we're seeing more of these roles or these specific parts of our job that we start handing off and automating and augmenting with AI, that we can really start showing up as humans. And I think that that's really actually kind of special.
Yeah, I one of the in my coaching and training program at Skill Charter, one of the things that we talk about a lot is receiving feedback. And it can be really, really challenging to receive feedback in a like hypercharged change environment
Yeah.
where the terms of the game have changed or the rules of the game have changed, and your success is maybe not as known or clear or as much of a given as it might have been in the pre-change world before things changed. What do
Mhm.
you notice about how people give feedback to one another, given these tools are really iterative in nature? How does that work, and what do you suggest around feedback?
You know, okay, so human to human, I think that is still an invaluable thing for us to be able to actually provide feedback to another human. Now, granted, you have to understand that the human on the other side is either going to be in a receptive or an unreceptive position, right, to actually
Mhm.
take that feedback. And also, if you are not given or provided actionable feedback, it's very difficult for people to actually then do something about it. So, that being said, I think that there is coachability or there are skills for people to have that human to human feedback loop actually could become a really fantastic human soft skill, right? Are you a good human at providing feedback? Do you provide actionable, tangible feedback? Now, when it comes to AI and the way that you can provide feedback to AI, that's interesting. That's a whole new twist, right? Is that we actually do need to make sure that we are providing feedback similarly to our AI that we would humans, but it doesn't have to be as emotionally charged. I'm not saying that all feedback should be,
That's
but I
been
am
the
saying that
that's
we
been the
actually
That's
yeah.
been exciting for me. Just the lack of defensiveness that I
Yeah.
experience
Oh,
with my
yeah.
AI tools compared to my humor, and, my human coworkers is almost a relief. I don't know if you've experienced that too.
Oh, absolutely, right? So I can say I actually don't need it that way, right? Like, almost that it's so interesting to think that there's times in the past where I could provide blunt feedback, but because there's a human on the other end of that, I have to be cautious or I need to, you have to understand the human on the other side. When you're speaking to a machine that's literally it's it's language. It's literally just understanding your next word or guessing your next word, right? You can actually be very blunt and very specific with what you have to say. That actually shortens that feedback loop cycle, right? Like you can actually very quickly and adequately say, no, I need you to do it this way. Where I can say in the past, I've tiptoed around those conversations with employees. Now, granted, was I being a great leader in that position by tiptoeing? Probably not, but I can say that that's just being a human. Like, I don't want to hurt another human's feelings. I do, in fact, want very quick, actionable, action taken on what I just provided feedback. And right now, I can tell you that that happens so much faster with AI versus a human. It's interesting.
It is interesting. Well, I kind of want to dig a little bit more into something that we mentioned before, which is that, now that we see leaders, companies, maybe not even tech companies, but just more broadly, really wanting to apply these tools in a consistent way and train up their teams and embrace it as here to stay. What kinds of resistance do leaders tend to face in the process of implementing that change?
I mean, this is a pretty significant change. There's there is a lot of resistance, and honestly, there still is a lot of fear when it comes to people not understanding what this tool is and what it's capable of,
Hmm.
right? If you don't have clarity, if you don't have that level of understanding of how you can lean into it, it's almost unreasonable to ask for people to start adopting it. And that being said, there's a lot of ways that you can do that. You can enable your team through, I mean, YouTube videos on the tools that you currently have in place within your own company. You can create your own, spin up your own L&D team. You can lean on companies like Learnair, where we bring in a special, like an actual expertise on how you implement these over time. But that being said, it's truly working with your people to begin to lay that foundational education as to what it is. When people say AI right now, you can think of all kinds of different things. You can think of, I mean, Snapchat AI, you can think of all of these other tools that are just very, we all have a different perception as to what it does, right? So if there is a foundational knowledge level you can come in and actually share with your team to say, this is an AI tool that we plan to utilize. To be honest with you, most companies haven't even made that set decision. Right? So let's just say it's Claude. If we're going to go ahead and lean into Claude and we're going to move forward with that tool, and you don't spread that educational foundational knowledge across the entire company as to what the heck it is and how you even speak to it, then you can't change people's mind enough to go and say, you know what, I think I can do this new thing with it. Oh my gosh, I think it can take on my social media creation. I there's so many different applications, and if you don't take the time to begin to understand foundationally what this is, it it won't go far.
It occurs to me that one of the things that we often talk about with leaders in terms of being a strong anchor or being a strong leader for a transition is having a strong vision. And in something like AI, where there's a testing or emerging technology that everybody's exploring together, how do you create a vision that people can trust to get that buy-in, that kind of initial buy-in?
Truly leading by example. I mean, honestly, that's where I'm seeing the most effective AI rollout throughout companies. When you when you watch a leader who says, "Hey, we're going to do this," and they start using it and they're loud about it and they're showing their leadership team, their VPs, their directors, and then they actually start seeing how you're using it, there's going to be so much more receptivity, and honestly, there's excitement that gets started, right? Like it's the truly low-hanging fruit, the simple things that you don't realize that you're spending your time on that makes the biggest impact. And so by being a leader that steps in and says, "Yep, we're going to do this thing. We're going to utilize this tool." If you don't use it yourself and you're not talking about it, it's going to take a long time for the rest of the team to adapt. And when it comes to a technology like this that is moving rapidly, I mean, right now your competitor is using it. Like, just simply put, the person that you are competing against in your market, is using it. And that is something you need to make sure that you as a company understand and that you start preparing your people to say, hey, if we are going to keep pace, we have to. It's, yeah, I use it or lose it.
Absolutely. So there's this definitely this feeling, I think, of urgency and being able to stay relevant in the marketplace by utilizing the tools that are now available. And then you're also balancing this with something that I was so pleased to see that your company really focuses on, which is ethics. And
Yep.
how do we prevent harm, inequality? I'm curious, like, how do you think about ethics around AI in your company, and how do you help companies bring in an ethical perspective on the tools that they adopt and the way that they do their rollout?
I mean, I think it's really mission based, right? So, us here at Learnair, I mean, we are tool agnostic. We basically say if you have an AI tool you want to use, go through and explore and understand it and then share it with the class essentially, right? We actually have what we call air show on Fridays where our team will go through and just explain what did I do unique this week with AI? What new tool did I discover? What new thing did I find? And it can be as simple as, hey, I just set up a new email filter, right? Like those things are actually really big. And maybe not everybody on the team understands that that's available to them or accessible to them. And so truly taking the opportunity to go through and share with each other. And honestly, the funniest thing is in all of this, like our mission at Learnair is to usher humanity into the new era of AI, right? That's a really big, broad stroke mission. But that being said, we focus so hard on the humans, the actual humans behind the roles, that when we go through and we help other companies really focus on the humans and those humans understanding, dissecting, redesigning their roles, you see the excitement come through. Like you see people want to start talking about it with their colleagues, their coworkers, and say, "This is what I did." And then you can see that snowball effect. You see people in the company want to talk about things that they're doing that's making their job faster, easier. They're getting to spend more time being a human because they got so much work done with their automations or their augmentation that now they can go do that.
Yeah, it makes me think, one of the positive outcomes of the pace at which technology is moving is that everyone shares this experience of being a beginner, no matter where you are.
Absolutely. Yes, that's so true.
Yeah. So and that I think, when I think about being a beginner, that is kind of a power change within workplaces, right? If expertise in the past was the way that people earned power in a workplace, were able to move up in their role, become a guide for others, and we're
Mhm.
all beginners, how is power changing as you notice it in workplaces now that we have introduced these tools?
To be entirely honest with you, we have so many subject matter experts that usually live deep within an organization that the power shift when it comes to AI is that there's actually this great equalizer, right? One of the things that people are maybe unfamiliar of is there is the ability to have 25 years of experience that you have lived out in your role. And there's also the ability for you to create a persona within AI that also brings in that same knowledge level or that experience set that you can create that same knowledge now. You can create the knowledge. So there's a power shift in the sense that if you are someone that leans into AI and you know how to properly prompt it and ask it to represent a certain knowledge set, you actually can go into a conversation, a strategic conversation with a knowledge that far surpasses your own because you're bringing an AI tool into this with you that supports you and allows you to ask more strategic questions. Maybe it allows you to isolate more more specific data that will actually get you to your answer faster. There's what's even more interesting is watching people's adaptability once they start leaning into AI, right? You can really see how how their brains kind of change into this is how I've done it in the past and this is how I can do it in the future. You're watching people become agility and you're watching people learn at a rate that's basically exponential. One of the things I actually heard from a gal who actually is here from Portland, she was telling me that she had spent 30 years in the legal industry and that, it gets exhausting spending 30 years in the same role. But when she went through our training and she began to look at new opportunities with AI, she's like, I just think I thought of a new business. I found a new vertical. And so when you see that there's this shift, this expertise, you can use your expertise in a new way. It's really, it can be extremely expansive. And there's also always the opposite or the polar, perspective of it can feel really demeaning. And so I want to make sure that people can understand that you can empower yourself to show up in any conversation with any kind of level of expertise behind you if you lean into the power of AI and utilize that in a new way.
So that's an interesting vignette. And I feel like it kind of leads into this idea that AI can be an on ramp for people into industries that they may not have been in before.
Yeah,
Could you share a little bit about, your work in that area and how you're creating inroads for different groups of people to access work in technology?
absolutely. So one of the things that we're observing most is that as people are beginning to shed the, 10 hours a week that they would spend in emails, as they're doing that, they are now having more strategic conversations or realizing that they really have a passion in a different industry even. And when you open up that time in your own week to be able to go and explore something new, it's amazing to watch or to observe someone's perspective change and say, you know what, I have an opportunity here. So we see it oftentimes within an organization. We'll see someone's role basically say, hey, you know what, this is actually the human piece of my role. You can dissect out what the actual human part should be in that role now, where realistically, like I've mentioned in the past, like 80% of that could be handed off or automated to see then, hey, what am I going to do with that other 80% of my time? How do I then show up as a human better in my role or differently within my role or my organization? There's likely going to be shifts into new roles that you didn't know that you wanted to be in previously. There's opportunity for literally roles that have never existed on an org chart before, right? We have the ability to create so much right now, to create roles that have never existed. And I think that that's actually extremely exciting when we can get past some of the old roles that we've had in the past on org charts being eliminated. Now, what I don't want to do is I don't want to spear or kick off any kind of fear conversation here. I don't want people to be afraid and think that, my role's being deleted. But realistically, there will be a lot of these roles that will end up shifting significantly. And what's really funny is working with some of the companies I have, I've actually had CEOs come to me and say, I need to find new ways to fill their time. Like, they're doing so much work so fast. I need to actually find new ways for them to show up as humans.
Mhm.
To have a conversation with a CEO that said they're doing too much work too fast, that's that's a whole new kind of conversation.
Yeah, it is, and it's a question that makes me pause. My husband went to law school, and the big joke that we would make is that law school is a pie eating contest, and the prize is more pie. How do we how do we take this pie eating contest that we're winning now and not make the prize more pie, not make it more of the same, make it something that is more human or that helps us reach goals that are maybe more I don't the part of me is, like, altruistic, right? Or has wins that include wins for the employees themselves.
Yeah, to be frank, a lot of times it's actually allowing the human to have their time back. So
Mm,
one of the things I've observed multiple companies do right now is when they go through and they watch their employees assess their processes and put the automations in place or the augmentation using AI in place, the time that gets opened up, they don't replace, right? They'd simply just say, "There's your time back.
mm,
What are you gonna go do?" Right? So if you have a leader that's willing to say something like that, willing to say, "Hey, um, like, go explore, go see what you wanna do. Take that time for learning, development, personal development, right? Career development. when you have the opportunity to have that time back in your life, what are you going to do with it? And I actually, to be honest with you, I actually think that question might be as scary as AI itself.
100%, because what I'm going to say is practice piano, which I can never force myself to do, but but I want to do. I want to double down on these kind of like non-AI things that can help me, become a better person overall, more rounded out person. But it is interesting, like once we've been on the wheel for so long to actually reach for something that gives us pleasure or is challenging in a different way can actually be a personal challenge. Um,
Yeah. Oh, what's really funny is I'm a CEO of a company now. Granted, I spend a lot of my time in front of a computer. I have a lot of conversations in person. By the time I'm done with my day, all I want to go do is go lay in my grass or go garden. I want to go
yeah.
do those things that allow me to really like feel human. I want my hands in the dirt. What's so funny, like, that's, like, such a human thing that shows up at the end of my day, right? Like, I really wanna go spend that time, and so allowing myself to say, "I did a lot today with with how I utilized AI. I'm going to go take that time back and enjoy my human experience." I think that that's really valuable for people to do that too.
I love that mindset shift because we want the technology that we're adopting to actually improve our lives, not to make us more, committed to spending our time in the pursuit of something that can then be, automated or could be done elsewhere.
Absolutely.
So that self-development piece feels really important. Okay, I don't want to get off the phone with you without like exploring a little bit of doom and a little bit of possibility. So I
Absolutely.
want to hear from you. What, and I've asked most of the people who have participated in this particular series, what are you afraid of or what gives you pause or what concerns you about how we're approaching this like huge cycle of change that we're in right now? And what are you looking forward to? What is feeling really exciting?
I think where fear tends to show up for me in the era of AI is actually watching other people stay stuck in fear. I mean,
Mhm.
truly, like, watching people not be able to move past that, and there are most people we've worked with have been able to do that, but there are people that get stuck, and I think that that hesitation and that stickiness can really hold you back and disallow you to to explore the opportunity. There's so much opportunity with this, right? And so one thing I can say is we can't simply ostrich our way out of this, right? We cannot stick our head in the sand and avoid what's happening here. This is truly, truly here. And as much as I understand that, there's some doom behind that. We didn't ask for AI to be unlocked and become public to all of us when it did 3 years ago. That being said, I think there is so much possibility here with this for us to create whole new jobs, like roles that we've never explored. I just think that there is so much new possibility when it comes to advancing, I mean, honestly, medication, nutrition. Like there's so much concern around environmental impacts with AI, and all I want to do is just say lean into AI to ask how we can prevent it from having a negative environmental impact, right? Like let's use this technology to actually solve this own problem that it could be creating.
Mhm.
Have there's I live in this dual perspective. Like I understand the fear and I absolutely choose to look at the positive as
Mm.
much as I can. I'm definitely trying to look at the positive as much as I can.
Well, it has been really a joy to talk to you, Teresa. Thank you so much for being a guide for us today. And if people want to find out more about your work and check out what you're doing at LearnAir, how can they do that?
Absolutely. Please do visit our website at learnair.com. It's learnair.com. You can take a look at some of the things, services that we have there, but realistically, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can quite literally reach out to me at Teresa at learnair.com, and I would be happy to engage and answer questions if I can. I I am here and I just don't want people to forget the human part. We have this one experience, so take advantage of this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I'd love to thank you for listening to our guest today. As a reminder, this spring, the People and Culture team at Tao has taken over the pod. We're exploring the human side of the massive tech shifts happening right now. And each week, we're talking to a different Portland leader about what they're seeing in their work and personal lives, and what that means for the rest of us as we navigate rapid change. I'm your host, Kate Cockrill, leadership coach, trainer, and co-founder at Skill Charter. If this conversation sparked something for you, I'd love to hear about it. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just send me a DM. And if you have a story, perspective, or question you think we should share or explore, just reach out. We're building this in real time, and your feedback will help us shape what comes next.